Welcome, everyone, to AnyStrike The Edge. I'm your host, Scott Holbrook. With me, as always, is the man, Noad Neo Lahat, MMA veteran, Bellator UFC. I've also got with me Adam Paul Smolak, serial entrepreneur, CEO of AnyStrike. And today we've got an amazing show. I'm very, very excited about this. In the seat across from us, we've got a man that really needs no introduction in international legal circles. He's been the corner man for companies, firms, entities that have been going to war in probably the most brutal business environment on the planet. That would be China. He is one of the foremost experts on Chinese law, international law, generally speaking. Good friend of mine from my China days, Mr. Dan Harris. Dan, thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you for having me. I'm looking forward to it.
Right. So just to get things started, why don't you tell people about, a little about yourself, how you got into international law, what it is you've done, the China law blog, give people, kind of an understanding of, of where you've been, what you've seen, and then we'll get into the meat of things.
Okay. Well, I was kind of a geek as a kid, and I always wanted to do international law growing up in Kalamazoo, Michigan. And I eventually did it. And I started out doing a lot of work with Russia. And then China came along, and it was sort of a logical switch over because in many ways, at least back then, they were very similar countries. And China just took off. That was maybe 15, 20 years ago. And for a long, long time, I was doing almost nothing but China. But as China continues to fade for various different reasons, some of which I'm sure we will talk about today, my practice and that of my firm has expanded where we are now helping companies get out of China, get elsewhere, Thailand, Vietnam. We have a lot of lawyers in Spain. We're doing a lot more in Latin America these days.
Very nice. So you said something that is probably just now actually being said, and that's you're helping people get out of China. For the longest time, the trend was people wanting to go into China, and then recently through affairs and stuff that seems to have changed. What is I guess what's your take on that? What kind of started that change? Where as your law firm have you been positioned in that in that process?
Well, I think what started the change was President Xi, and Xi was a dose of reality to all those, including me, who thought that China would keep getting better, and China did keep getting better until Xi came along. And by better, I mean more of a fair player in international trade, better legal system, better in terms of free speech, etc. She came along and things stagnated and then started getting worse. And a lot of people who had previously said, people like me, we need to be patient with China, give it time, it's getting better. If we were being honest, we could no longer keep saying that. And then all of a sudden, President Trump came along. And I am no fan of President Trump, let me be clear. But I think on China, that's about the only thing he's done a pretty good job on. The big moderate foreign policy think tank, I can't think of the name right now, rated Trump on various aspects of foreign policy. They gave him mostly D's and F's, but for China, they gave him a B+. And I think that's about what he deserves. And their complaint regarding China is the same as my complaint regarding how Trump has handled China. And that is, I'm disappointed that he hasn't brought in our allies to help us. And that's because Trump doesn't really understand the concept of allies. He views Canada, Mexico, the EU as just one small step worse than China. And that's not how I see the world. And so that's what, then Trump comes along and he imposes tariffs on China. That was maybe 2 years ago. Most people were saying, hey, this is no big deal. Economics says that the parties are going to resolve it. We, meaning my law firm and me, were writing on our blog, China Law Blog, no, this is the beginning of the end. We first came out and said that in October 2018, and we said it because we were of the view that if this is just an economic fight, then all China needs to do is buy more soybeans and it will end. But it was clearly more than that. We saw it as a political fight. We saw it as a military fight. We saw it as a market entry fight, not a dollar fight, but a market entry fight, meaning the US was saying, if you don't treat us even remotely like we treat you in terms of allowing our companies into China, things are going to change.
Right. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more with you, Dan, that was when the tide turned and there was a reciprocity. There was a feeling of reciprocity that the WTO, we had given a lot to allow China out of the cold. And there had been a lot of wealth gained in China, and there had been a lot of headway, and we were very proud to be a part of that. But reciprocity, and you started seeing signs, and I don't know where the Germans lie, but there was a lot of signs with the 3D, the 3G, and going into 4G to see there was a lot of problems with the China government. Taking technology, let's say, and there was already, between Cisco more than a decade ago and Huawei, there were already signs of IP theft, and this was already starting to litter the conversation. So as you let them out of the cold, and we're allowing them, not only are they stealing technology, but there's kind of there's a close off of markets. And we're not making progress in a lot of those areas of financial opening, which is starting to come today. But a lot of those developments haven't happened. What is your take on that?
Well, China came out with Made in China 2025.
Right.
Which essentially, to grossly summarize, it said everything that really matters, we need to dominate and crush everybody else. And when other countries said, wait a second, this isn't right, this isn't how trade is supposed to operate, China's response internally was not, we shouldn't be thinking like this. It was, who were the idiots who allowed the West to see all this?
Right.
And what was so interesting about that was China had become so arrogant that they believed nobody would notice or be able to understand what was going on. And so what they did was they said, well, no more Made in China 2025. Well, that's ridiculous. I talk all the time about protecting your IP. And I always read something that came out from China's National Scientific Group, very government connected, very government based. And they basically said, we are not good at innovating. We need to steal. And people were mad about that. And they said, that's not how it's supposed to be. So they said, okay, consider that we didn't say it. Well, the problem is you can remove what's been said, but that doesn't mean the emotion, the feelings, the beliefs, the policies behind that have changed one bit. And they have. They've just moved back a little bit, waiting until the time will be exactly right again.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think there's more than the 225 plan. There's the 100-year plan that puts China front and center as the leader, the dominant force, and leading everything. And I think there is a difference there. And if we could take a time out and bring in Noad for a second, Noad comes from Israel, where there is definitely a very close correlation between government the state and private industry. But it's also one of the greatest democracies in the world. And there is a court and there's a lot of balance. So
or
from
not
your
1.5 billion people.
Right, correct. The dynamics, the demographics are definitely different. But when you look at China, and Noad, I don't know how you perceive, and that's where I bring you into the conversation as well. When you perceive a country that is basically military focused and the goal of taking over, the goal of pushing, Huawei as a national tool, whether they're spying or not, they're obviously subsidizing hundreds of companies and pushing them out. What do you think about that, Noad? What do you think about that, Dan? What, in general, that focus, that supremacy focus, is kind of what I think is different than what other governments are bringing to the table. No one's really doing that, or since World War II in some ways. What do you make of that?
Well, first of all, let me refer to what Dan said. So I'm not as familiar as you guys, obviously, about China, but I can tell you that, as Trump would say, he did a fantastic job in the Middle East. And he is the first one in a long time that actually treat his allies the way it should. I think a lot of his character, as much as it unpleasant to us, maybe as Western, I think it speaks greatly what we need to. If it's North Korea, if it's the Middle East, if it's China, and that's what I have to say about that. I think that the whole movement, since Russia came back to the game, and China, and you feel them everywhere. If you feel them, if it's in Africa, if it's in the Middle East, you kind of feel them pulling back. If it's Russia, if it's Iran, and the world is a little more relaxed. Even before Corona brought a lot of quiet to the world because nobody want to fight. But if you notice, a lot of the wars just a little calm down. The fire got a little quiet in the last 4 years or so.
See, I think though that there hasn't been a quiet, and what I would argue, and Dan, I don't know, there's been a lot of silent takeover, and China. See, I think that on one level there's been calm. On some level, the Middle East has had calm. There's been there hasn't been calm in Syria, but we've been distracted. We've been distracted by a rising China. And there's been a complete takeover, right, Dan? As the world is diverted away, they've just completely taken control.
I generally agree with you. One of the things that really angers me is a lot of people have been convinced by China that China has no expansionist goals. China always says that. China says, we haven't been a colonial power. Well, they weren't a colonial power because they were weak. Now they're strong. Now they are a colonial power. To say that they're not is ridiculous. They have essentially taken over Tibet. They've essentially taken over Xinjiang. They're trying to take over Hong Kong. They're trying to take over Taiwan.
Africa.
Just today, 20 Indian soldiers were killed. And what people are saying, and I think this is right, is that China is making a move there right now because India is weakened by the coronavirus. And China has been messing with the Philippines, messing with Vietnam for years now. They're slowly but surely taking over islands in various seas, etc. So as the world has quietly watched and now is finally saying enough.
So isn't it interesting that we have a situation where just 10 years ago, China was like the Switzerland of international diplomacy, where all they wanted was harmonious dialogue, and they didn't want to comment on anything that wasn't in their sphere. Today, they've had to branch out. And two, and I want to go to you, Noad, is it's interesting because as an American and as an Israeli, Noad, you know about war, but as Americans, we really know about war. Everybody here has a family member that's fought in a war or that have been in a war themselves. And two, we have friends and we honor soldiers that have died in war almost daily in this country since we went to the first Iraq war. And to me, what we've learned is a couple lessons from that. One, how hard it is to maintain. It might be easy to take over, but it's not easy to maintain. And two, and I think you can speak to this, Noad, fighting is a lot more glamorous than when you get in the ring and you take punches. I don't think that China's ever really taken punches. And when you look at what's happening in Hong Kong, that's just the beginning to taking punches. Right? As you sprout out, you're going to take more beatings, and they've never taken a beating.
So I have friends in Hong Kong, and honestly, I thought that someday, you're going to become part of China. It's pretty terrifying. But it's obviously they are in the list of everything bad on earth. How come we don't treat them as such? How come is it cheap iPhones that we prefer over that, or
yes,
or is it something else? Okay, I like cheap iPhones, but what's the price?
They're not cheap, but yeah, there's only so much we can do when we're getting our iPhones and a million other things from China. That's why we can't unwind from China today. It's going to take time.
Right. Well, and so a couple strains have been coming out. So one, I thought it telling, Dan, when you were speaking of, China has, they started off, like kind of Paul was saying, is all harmony, is all gland. We have no colonial aspirations. They've convinced some people of that. Some people still believe that. There are tons of apologists everywhere. But now there's this rise of what they're calling the wolf warrior, right? Wolf warrior diplomacy, and wolf warrior. You can, so it's all about the wolf warrior, and it stems from that movie where they got their own version of Arnold Schwarzenegger, commando style, right? And so how, I guess, do you where do you see that going? Like where do you see the wolf warrior tactics from China? Where do you see the the apologist, Sean Rain and Fionn Wright, these people that are, basically, downing the West in favor of this China narrative that, as we all here believe, is a complete sham.
Well, China's been overrated for a long time. I remember in 2008, when the U.S. was suffering economic problems, I would get asked a lot of questions when I would speak. I would speak about business law matters like intellectual property, but people would say, China's going to dominate this in 5 years. China's going to do this. Do you think their government's better than ours? I remember at some event, somebody said the reason China was so much better run than the U.S. was because they have engineers running their country and we have lawyers, to which my response was Jimmy Carter. But what I would also always point out is, why do we always talk about China doing amazing things? I'll tell you a country that's done amazing things that doesn't get publicity. South Korea. South Korea in 1962 was the second poorest country in the world, second only to Niger. It took me years to convince my uncle to go there. He served in the Korean War. He did not want to go back because all he remembered were the rats. Korea has not only become a wealthy country, I mean, Seoul's an amazing city. It's like Tokyo, but it's a democracy. That's the country we should be looking to. Taiwan is a country we should be looking to. It's done the same thing. And there's a term for countries like where China is right now. They're called middle market. And everybody always thinks these middle market countries, when they're growing fast, they're going to become super wealthy, become developed countries. Well, the reality is it's easy to become a middle market country. You do that with cheap labor. It's very difficult to become a developed country. In like the last 40 years, there have been only like 5 countries that have become developed countries. Chile, Taiwan, South Korea, Hong Kong, which barely counts, and Singapore, which barely counts. It's not that easy. There's no evidence to indicate that China is going to become a developed country. Yes, Shanghai is developed. Yes, Beijing is developed. But there are a billion people in, or I don't know if it's a billion, there are a lot of people in China who are living in poverty still. And China knows this. And China knows that they have overreached right now because the US is really going after them. And the EU, not loudly, but quietly, is sort of following. Japan is going after them. Japan is paying its companies to leave China. Other countries are supposedly doing that more quietly. So China's very worried. Why is China still buying agricultural goods from the United States under that, whatever it was called, phase 1 of the trade deal? They're doing it because they don't want more plugs pulled on them. Their unemployment rate is soaring. Their companies are in trouble. They're not getting access to high-end products that they need. This is not good for China. Their compact with their people basically has been, if we keep lifting you up, you have to let us basically control everything. That's the deal they made. And every year, China has been getting wealthier. That has ended. That's not a good thing for the CCP right now. And everybody says, well, people will say to me, well, there's no one can overthrow the CCP. Or they say, when's it going to get overthrown? And what I always say is, you never know. The CCP could be overthrown a month from now. It could be 10 years from now. I always go back to Tunisia, which was the start of the revolutions in the Middle East. I studied the Middle East a lot when I was in college. If you had asked me what country was going to have a revolution first, I would never in a million years have picked Tunisia. Why was it Tunisia? Because some street vendor lit himself on fire.
Right.
So revolutions come when there's a spark. That was the spark. And I'm not using that term to in any way denigrate that courageous person who lit himself on fire. It's just the term. But the reality is you need a lot of tinder and then there's a spark. Who would have predicted the George Floyd murder would have been the spark in the United States? We've had a lot of sparks that just didn't have enough tinder or were not big enough sparks until then. It's impossible to predict. So just because a government looks impenetrable doesn't mean it is. Russia looked impenetrable. Albania looked impenetrable. Egypt looked, I mean, countries fall, governments fall.
Let's change gears really quickly. I didn't get back because you mentioned George Floyd, and well, one of the things that's actually going on in China. So we've I've done some bit internationally there, and one of the narratives that's coming out now is China's pointing to us and say, well, look at the Americans. They got they can't handle their they got these race riots. They can't handle their own internal citizens. This is a failure of democracy. The Chinese way is the way to go. Like how I guess would you respond to the sorts of criticism like what is it about these race riots that have happened here that still puts us outside of the sort of problems that China has with the Xinjiangese and these other ethnic minorities like you've discussed already?
Well, I am furious about what happened to George Floyd, and I'm furious about race relations in the United States. And we deserve to be criticized for that. No doubt about it. What's happening? Pardon?
Not by China.
Well, I don't. I get mad when I'm criticized by China because I sort of feel like saying the nerve of you.
Right.
But here's the thing: what I equate George Floyd to is really what's going on in Hong Kong, and that's what the Chinese are trying to do as well. They're saying, there are protesters in Hong Kong. Now there are protesters in the U.S. What's the difference? Well, I'll tell you. I don't think there's much difference among the protesters because I think the protesters, I respect them for protesting. I think they should be allowed to protest. Protest to me is the sign of a strong democracy. The difference between Hong Kong and the US, and more particularly the US and China, is that as bad as things are here right now, and this is where the lawyer in me comes out, we still have a constitution that most people respect. I think our president does not respect it nearly enough, but we have a constitution that still exists, that is still respected, that says people are supposed to get equal rights. We have a democracy. China doesn't. Now, what really gets to me, though, is a long time ago, I read a book called World on Fire, and it was written by Amy Chua. She's a Yale law professor, more famously known as the Tiger Mom, because she also wrote that book. But in World on Fire, she talked about how democracies can be very difficult on minorities. And there's an obvious reason why. Because
majority rule.
Right. I mean,
right.
You can say, if black people are unhappy with what's going on in the United States, they should vote the people out. Well, the problem is there aren't enough of them to do that most of the time. And so that's not a good answer. The majority has to take these issues on as their own for the good of the country, and democracies have difficulty doing that. And President Trump has very much played into that with his dog whistle racism and his direct race baiting, and it's horrible. I'm not going to stand up. I'm not going to defend that.
Well, I would like
defending it is a good way to fight against China either. Meaning, I will admit we have problems. We're not flawless, but I'll take the U.S. over China any day.
Well, but I would say that that's a mischaracterization in some ways of the comparison, and I think that's one way to look at it. But in the United States, you're dealing with a population, people of color, African Americans, before them LGBT plus, that are fighting for more rights. Whereas in Hong Kong, the new laws are taking away rights. So the protest is different completely. And two, if you get to it, I think it's a better look at protest where the African community in Guangdong is up in arms because they're being targeted for being black and having probably more coronavirus because they're coming from global, or however people are looking at them, if they're dirty. I don't know, because I'm not on the street. I've heard reports, I've read reports like everyone else. But to me, when you look at their protest for more rights, as they've lived in Guangdong for decades now, and compared to trade with Africa, and that's the whole set, they have been forced out on the street. So it's interesting because you can see the protests in Hong Kong, but you can't see them in Guangdong. And what I'm concerned about within the next 10 years is you won't see it in Hong Kong either. And
Right.
that becomes an issue where I feel that gets into morality. And I feel like as you take the next step, you're looking at issues like HSBC Bank, okay? And you're looking at issues of morality. Now, HSBC, a British bank that is Hong Kong based, is now signing on with the new security laws. The British government is mad because they were threatened by the Chinese government. And now you're seeing companies having to adopt these policies. So as you talked about it, as as this develops, I see a new realm of commerce developing. I see people socially minded. I see youngsters around the world protesting hand in hand for African American rights, which to me is beautiful. And I don't see looters as a part of that movement. I see them as punks, and I think we all do. And the police are not arguing. No one's arguing for this. So that same populace that doesn't want suicide bombers, that doesn't want black folk choked because they're black, and people are scared of African Americans, so they react in a certain way. We want to stop that. Do we really want to accept at the same time a bank that retrenches on rights as HSBC? Do we really want to? Do we want to buy our products from places that conceal? We at the least know they conceal the internet for their people. Do you think there will be a problem with the ethical supply chain and where people buy from? Do you see that as an issue?
100% I do, and we've been warning about that for well over a year. But there's a point I need to go back at you on, and that is, you said protesters in the United States are fighting for more rights, not rights that have been taken from them. I don't agree with that, and there are two reasons. One, George Floyd, I think his rights were taken from him, and I think Black people in the United States, they're not fighting for more rights, they're fighting for the same rights everyone else has. I don't think that matters in terms of what you said, but I think that whatever people are fighting for here, whatever people are fighting for in Hong Kong, doesn't matter so much as how they are treated if we are going to compare the two countries. And already in the United States, the protests are having major impacts in cities, in the country, in the boardrooms, major positive impact. In Hong Kong, the protests are leading to more crackdowns. Now, you talk about young people being socially minded. I have two incredibly socially minded kids, 22 and 30 years old, one of whom lives like 2 blocks from the Capitol Hill autonomous zone, which is become famous worldwide. And they have participated in what seems to me just about every protest. And they listen to me complain about China all the time. And I'll sometimes say to them, and I used to say to their friends when they would come to our house before the coronavirus, look, there are more issues out there that you should be fighting for. But what I say now is, you take a company like Patagonia. That's a company that really does everything right. They are sincere. I mean, they ethically source everything in terms of the environment. Their products are amazing. Their products last forever to help the environment. What's it going to do with China? How can you be an ethically sourcing company and keep sourcing from China? How can you be an HSBC and basically capitulate on everything? Now, here's the answer. The answer is, and people ask me, well, you're so against China. Why don't you call for boycotting any company that does business with China? And the answer I always give is, it's too early for that. I have my firm, what I always say about our clients that are manufacturing in China is that every single one of them, and probably 30% of our clients are not US. I mean, they're European, they're Australian, they're Latin American, Mexican, whatever. 100% of them want to manufacture elsewhere. I have never asked a client, would you prefer to manufacture? A question I often ask is, let's say if I think their product can be made in Thailand, I will say, if you can get your product made in Thailand for 5% more than in China, would you do it? And every single time they immediately say, of course I would. I'd pay 10% more, 15% more. Same question about Mexico. The reality is so then you're saying, well, that can't be true, because why aren't they manufacturing in Thailand? Because it's not that easy. We have to give them time. They are trying incredibly hard. Just today, there was another article about American companies leaving and wanting to leave.
Right.
We can maybe talk about a boycott or a year and a half from now. Right now, what we should be talking about is helping these companies get out. Japan is paying its companies to stop manufacturing in China. Munchin keeps saying, we'll help American companies get out of China. Well, clients say to me, how are they going to help us? And I go, I don't know. So, you can't just turn on a dime. We've got to be patient. Now, what we can do, though, is call out companies that are crossing lines and call out people that are crossing lines. Adam talked about that. He named a few people. There are Americans on Twitter who deny China's doing anything in Xinjiang, in Tibet. I mean, they just flat out deny these things. Those people need to be called out. But a lot of our clients say, we know what's going on there. We don't like it. We want out. We had a client, they moved to Thailand. Now they advertise that their high-end kids' toys are made in Thailand. Why do they advertise that? Because people want to buy from Thailand, not from China. There needs to be more of a movement. We should harder, but still somewhat gently push companies to get out. But they're trying.
Well, I think that it's interesting dynamic, because you go on a LinkedIn and you see a person like Sean Rain, who's nothing more than an apologist, who went to a Canadian McGill and then Harvard, and then is on LinkedIn saying to his 20,000 plus followers that, in fact, Western education is overrated, and that he wouldn't send his kid there. I think what's happened is these apologists have become virulent, similar to these wolf diplomats. And wolf diplomat, I think, is that oxymoron where, diplomatic structure should be in talking and communicating and working together to achieve a goal and to reach an objective. I go back to the parallel, and you said you disagree with me, and I bring it to the point of, I said more because as I work with African Americans in different, from supply chain to working with them in different communities, the 67, the legislation didn't give them equal rights. And as they went back to their communities, nothing was equal. It was all segregated. Even today, you go to Jackson, Mississippi, and you see the streets in Jackson, and then you go outside of Jackson to white communities, and you won't see the same streets. And so I don't know if, in fact, there will be equality. I don't think Black people are expecting equality. They're expecting more. Is that a sad statement? They want equality. They want everything, and they should receive it. But it's definitely an ongoing struggle where the hearts and minds of people have to match up with economic opportunity, which have to match up with a change in perception. It's not okay just to say, I'm embracing African Americans. There's a lot of things that go with that. And to me, that's why I say more, because I don't think we've evolved even close to where we're going. And that battle is still raging. And I see, I just see that as a part of a conversation between communities, and it's difficult in our own country. And so then when you look at the China side and the American side, that dialogue is done over thousands of miles of water. And we're trying to figure out how to piece together. To me, that's, in a different language. And there's these disagreements that form. Diplomacy on every level, talking, has really come out from our culture that it works. Beating protesters doesn't work. Listening works. Talking, giving in, finding a middle ground, action, these things. And to me, what we're seeing in a microcosm in our own communities is progress. I'm seeing progress being made. I see a retrenchment, as we talked about in China. And I say to you, as you see this develop and your children see this develop and you see this transpire, do you see your clients at a certain point saying, even if it's 20%, right? What do I do? A, and B, do you think it takes all of these companies going to doing more lobbying with the administration here for infrastructure, like the infrastructure, the $1 trillion infrastructure plan today? If that was a $1 trillion manufacturing hub legislation, that would provide a fundamental framework for companies to get funding, to come back, to get machinery. There are programs in place, but I think there can be a lot more to bring that back. What do you think about those two issues, or in totality?
Well, I think you're right. There could definitely be a lot more to bring these companies back. I also think that I am saying that all our companies want out of China now, but if you had asked them 7 or 8 months ago, they would have said it's going to resolve itself. Almost all of our clients did not buy into our argument that the decoupling between China and the United States started 2 years ago. We had one client who did. They're sort of our poster child. They've been interviewed by a lot of newspapers. They called us up and said, we want out, help us get out. I didn't think they could get out as fast as they did. They're in the electronics business, and they were out in about 6 months. But most of them, it's very difficult to see change on the horizon when you don't see it in front of you. So they would say, well, we're not seeing any problems in China right now. But after COVID in China and then COVID in the rest of the world, they have had it, because they now realize they were totally dependent on China, and China has become incredibly risky. What's not getting a lot of play right now is a lot of Chinese factories are closing down. And when Chinese factories close down, they usually go out in a blaze of glory. And what their blaze of glory is to take orders from their regular customers, take those payments, and then disappear.
Oof.
In our firm, we call it the bricks for fish scam, because we first saw it about 15 years ago in a downturn in the Chinese economy when a company bought fish and got bricks instead. So that's a very common thing right now. Literally every day, I am getting 1 to 2 emails from somebody who said, I've been working with this company for 20 years. I sent them $400,000. They've gone radio silent on me for 2 months now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's bad. And this is just me. There are other people in my firm getting them too. And I write about this all the time. What's interesting is in the past, when I wrote about these things, people didn't listen as much, but they are starting to listen now, because I think the word is definitely getting out.
And so I guess what was their reasoning, like your former clients, current clients, like the mindset, because when you were warning them years and years ago, hey guys, this is coming, and if you look back years and years ago, like you say COVID now, but this isn't the first COVID, to be honest. You had SARS and you had MERS, and it became cyclical, right? Like every 10 years, like some disease pops up in China. And all this occurs. I mean, there's nothing that I guess really hasn't. Why has it changed now, right? Because all this stuff has been happening like cyclically for the past 20, 30 years, to be honest. Why couldn't they see it then? But now they're now.
I mean, the same reason why people in the United States say that COVID is a hoax, because until people see certain things with their own eyes, they almost don't believe it. And what's happened with China is, I mean, when I was younger, I grew up in Michigan, and then I left Michigan, and everyone would say, oh gosh, it was so obvious what was going on. GM and Ford, they didn't see anything. They should have seen this. They should have seen that. They didn't keep up with the Japanese. And my response always was, look at it from their perspective. You're General Motors. You've been dominating the worldwide auto industry for 50 years. You've done everything right. How easy is it to all of a sudden do everything differently? When you're succeeding, it's really tough to change. That's why startups can oftentimes eat big companies for lunch, because success breeds inflexibility almost inherently. And so as long as somebody's been doing fine in China for 20 years, they're not going to listen. Now, what they would say is, oh yeah, I know we need to diversify, and we're working on that. But until it's urgent, it doesn't work. Another analogy I always use is my eldest daughter's 6th grade basketball team. We would tell them, you're dribbling too high and your passes are too soft. And they didn't listen because nobody was stealing the ball. So we moved them up into an 8th grade league. And in that first game they played, they had the ball stolen from them about half the time. And by the second half, it was down to about 25%. And by the third game, they were not dribbling high and they were pressing hard every time. Until you've been hit with reality, it's all meaningless. It's somebody preaching to you.
Well, I think, though, Dan, that there's another vantage point. We have to look at why this started. And it started because companies like Nike and Apple led the transition into Chinese manufacturing. Apple, over 1 million jobs through Foxconn. And Nike is producing across China. Now, in my opinion, both of these companies are the biggest violators, not only to the American dream and American economic situation by outsourcing all the jobs, but especially to African American communities. No bigger, in my opinion, there's no bigger sellout than Nike. Sure, they'll make Kaepernick a face of a campaign, but they would never give Jordan ownership of his sub-brand, nor would they make Kaepernick an owner in anything, because like the UFC, ownership for their players, is not there. And if they really wanted to make a difference for the black community, they could have created manufacturing across, places like Mississippi, in Georgia, which I don't say Cincinnati or the Midwestern states where I'm from, Chicago, not because I don't love my brethren there, my sisters, but I feel that, you had so much institutional disadvantage across the South, and you had such opportunity with the ports to bring it there. If Nike would have taught folk how to make product and created hubs there, all different from design to media jobs would have been present. And to me, if they would leave if they would lead that transition back and really make investments across the United States, then every country would follow suit. And to me, that's what needs to happen.
Well, and before I'd like your opinion on this too. So what ended up speaking about, lack of ownership, for Michael Jordan and LeBron doesn't own, and Kaepernick, and as he had said, the UFC has the same sort of 360 arrangement, but right now that battle is being fought in the UFC. And you do have stars like Conor McGregor, demanding ownership. You do have, people dropping out over, one, lack of pay, but two, the inability, from my perspective, to actually go out and earn. Like Noah, can you speak a little bit on, how those, trends are developing in the UFC, versus ownership of your own brand, opportunities that you have or don't have on account of the way, that business is structured on that 360 ownership of the athletes?
Well, in MMA, we got a problem that in different than boxing, we don't have the Ali Act to protect us. So, the Ali Act, it's a federal law that comes to protect the boxers from, for example, the matchmaker, the title holder, and the manager can't be the same person. While the UFC are all those person. So they monopolize the market, so they can offer contracts to a fighter, which he got no other choice but sign it. So
right.
That's the problem. That's the problem with MMA currently.
But please.
Yeah, UFC basically own everything. They own the avatar, the name of the fighter, the everything.
But I think that's very different, Scott. I understand you're pointing to Noad and the similarity of lack of ownership. I do want to have Dan come back here, because Dan, you see where I'm coming from, and Noad, I hope you see where I'm coming from too. But you want to change something, it's got to be like in the fight world. If Conor McGregor right now, Jorge Masvidal, John Jones are all saying 18% revenue share compared to 50% in most sports is bullshit.
Right.
And if they don't come out and do it, the small guys that come out, they just say, F them, we'll get them your replacement fighters. That's my point, is if big companies in any industry, whether it be fighting or the NFL or music, Jay-Z or any of these folks, if they don't come out and support, people don't speak out. So why isn't it, Dan, that the big companies who have 1.5 trillion in valuation for Apple the other day, and they can't move back jobs and recorrect minority issues? That's what I was saying. What did you think about that?
I don't care.
I think it's extremely complicated. It reminds me of a friend of ours who was head of PR for a well-known Seattle company. And she had been at an event, and she was this was many years ago, she was bragging about how much her company cared about the people who lived in the city of Black people who lived in the city of Seattle. If they got jobs with this company in a suburb, they would bus them there. And she was acting like that was the greatest thing. And I said to her, what are you even talking about? This company left Seattle when things started getting tough. if they really cared about Seattle, they wouldn't be in Redmond, and it's not Microsoft, by the way. They would not be there. And so you're essentially saying that about Nike. I take a little bit more of a moderate stance on this because generally I think that the U.S. economy was doing extremely well before COVID. And bringing low-paid jobs back to the United States was not really terribly necessary. And so my view has been, and Nike spreads it around the world more than anybody, just about. I mean, they do manufacturing in like 80, 85, 100 different countries. I have said every dollar that goes from China to Mexico or to Colombia or to Guatemala or to Poland is a victory for the United States. Because I would love to see Mexico do better. I would love to see Haiti do better. And I am actually working at the very beginning of working with some countries in Africa to try to help them get more manufacturing from overseas. Now, one of the problems, I have a very, very good friend. He's a Mexican lawyer. I've repeated this story a million times, but one day we were talking on the phone and he said, we were talking about how to get more of this business to Mexico. This lawyer actually speaks Chinese too. And he said, Mexico, we're the worst country in the world at doing this. And I started thinking about it and I said, you know what? You are the worst country in the world at bringing in foreign manufacturing, but you're tied with every other country in the world except China. China is amazingly good at making it amazingly easy to manufacture your widgets there. So if you're a small company, it almost has to be China. We have pushed some of our smaller clients who were saying, I'm going to be making this new product in China. And we'll say, what about Thailand? What about Vietnam? They'll say, well, we tried it. We couldn't figure it out. I know somebody who can help you for not very much money. And then we get them to use them and then they do it and they're really happy. It's not easy. Now, Nike knows what they're doing. They can move anywhere. And you're right. I hadn't thought about it. Some of these American companies should be called to task for not doing more in the United States. But then again, our governments haven't exactly done it either.
Well, but Dan, so that's the point here, though. When you look at, first of all, the argument that Africa or the Philippines or any of these countries, it can be outsourced too. I think it's an opportunity for them, and I am open. Water seeks cracks, and you have an opportunity to develop a country. I think it's great. However, the future will be the strength of localized economies, because it's in the local area that we need to strengthen the job markets, because we have a disparity of income here. We have a disparity of income in every country around the world, and without creating sub-supply chains within regional supply chains, regional manufacturing, we're not going to be able to win. And that's the future. And second of all, it doesn't matter what China wanted to do. Their model, the truth is, their model doesn't make sense, because what happened to the world is we became in the West, especially let's take America, a low inventory market where we warehouse, the distributors get in the nick of time product, or they pre-sell it, and then 10 days later, 14 days later, they deliver to the client. What's happening is buying containers doesn't make sense. And what I think will happen, and if you look at where automation is taking us, where 3D printing and automation used to be how to make something to sell to retail quickly, now automation is how to make widgets for components for your old Chevy cars that you can't find replacement parts. and more so for mass manufacturing of widgets in time, customized. And my point is, I don't think that China, as a mass manufacturer, that model of the world makes any sense. And I don't think it makes sense to go to a Mexico when you need nick and time, customized solutions.
Well,
I think that's the key.
It depends on the product. Meaning we have a client that is building a factory in the United States, and their costs are going to be less than in China because it's a high-tech factory with 35 very highly skilled workers. That's a good thing. But the United States should not start manufacturing rubber duckies.
No.
Okay, so it really does depend on the product. I attended a webinar a couple months ago put on by some high-level people from Prolegis, the big warehouse company. And they said that they're neutral because they have warehouses everywhere. And they were saying that what they are seeing is nearshoring and some reshoring. And so I said to them, okay, nearshoring, who's going to benefit from that? And they said, look at a map. Mexico for the US, Poland for Europe. And I thought, yeah, that's pretty obvious. I mean, as Mexico gets wealthier, the US gets wealthier. Now, I mean, not the same way as if Jackson, Mississippi gets wealthier, but there are still going to be certain things that it really does make sense to manufacture in Mexico. And you can't expect Nike to sell their shoes for $200 if Adidas is having their shoes made in Vietnam and able to sell them for $170.
Well, no, you can. You can do that because at a lower margin, they're going to increase more consumerism amongst communities here. And two, then you can make an argument that the international side with the tariffs, they're going to have a hard time anyways. But I want to get to something. Dan, to me, I understand the argument. In 2008, I had 2007, I started an office in Hermosillo, Mexico. And I began working with Tec de Monterrey and other universities on vocational training. And the Sonoran government, I met with Maria Campos and the Secretary of Economics, and they were very specific that they only wanted really auto business in that region. And they were pretty specific in what they wanted. They weren't interested broadly. And then as I went to Guadalajara and got in more business, and in 2010, I was held for ransom in Zamora, Mexico. And I experienced firsthand the difficulties in dealing with many issues in Mexico, especially the government. The changing of governments has been a problem. So to me, I don't see Mexico. I don't see an interest on American companies. I see for a long time now, they feel that their rights are not protected in Mexico, that logistically there's not a lot of support, and that it's not easy. So I don't know. I would love to see Mexico. I live in Tucson. I would love to see Mexico regain its interest by companies, but I'm afraid that that's not happening. I think the Native American communities here, I think there are poor communities throughout the United States that are perfect for bringing, not rubber duckies, but a lot of manufacturing.
Right. Well, and it won't just be rubber duckies either that come back. And I think that kind of where we're at now is a convergence of a whole lot of things that relates actually to everything we've talked about. And so at the point that companies like Adam Paul is saying, Nike and Apple, they are right. So they take it all to China, and now they start developing China. And one of the biggest points of, the apologists, Sean Rain into Cheap China, and these guys is simply that, what China has done, from 1980s, 70s to being nothing but a bunch of farmers and, at the bottom of the totem pole to lifting so many people out of poverty. It was basically on the backs of these companies like Nikes and Apples and bringing it back. And so, yeah, they had that success, but that success could have been had here. Why not? Honestly speaking. And so one issue that we've talked about, and this comes to the race relations now is there's a lack of economic opportunity. There's not, there's not so many, well-paying jobs in a lot of these areas like at Jackson, Mississippi, or throughout the South. The streets are terrible. Whereas, should an Apple or Nike come in and establish manufacturing there, there could be. Now, what would go along with that on the regional level is that, yeah, there would have to be some education, right? Like you're going to actually have to teach them how to do 3D automation. You're going to have to teach them, how to do more advanced methods of manufacturing, but now it's going to bring the education level up. And so that's one piece. And Dan, I kind of want to get into this as well with your firm. I understand that your firm does do some work in drugs, marijuana, and one of the other challenges to the Black community. So I said, one, there's the poverty, there's the economic issues. Why aren't we building these factories in the South to give them opportunities, economic opportunities, jobs, education, all the rest? But secondly, one of the statistics that's thrown out there very often is that a lot of the legal actions against minorities, against Blacks, they're drug related. And so, the prisons are, 80% and all the rest. And so, in your experience, Dan, do you find, that to be true? Is your firm, working on the legal issues, of marijuana, which does, it seems anyway, disproportionately affect the Black community, in the same way that, economic inopportunity does, like where does that play in to this whole picture?
Okay, a lot of great issues. I'm going to deal with first with a quick follow-up on the Nike issue, and then I'll turn to the cannabis. On the Nike issue, it's great that you raised the issue of Native Americans, because I went on a case, I visited a family on a tribe north of Seattle, and I have never in my life seen such poverty. It was unreal. I lived in Turkey for a year before Turkey was much developed at all, and it was way wealthier. There were 15 people living in basically a shack. It was a disgrace that was going on 90 miles from where I live, and no one ever talks about that. So yes, I mean, I would love to see that. And one of my problems that I love to chide my older brother on, he's a very successful stockbroker. He thinks I'm basically a communist and don't understand economics, but I all but majored in economics. And my problem is a lot of times I think very much like an economist, and I'll have to stop and say, you know what? I would be happy to have our GDP reduced. Not right now. I'm a lot less likely to say this than 6 months ago, but I'd be happy to have our GDP reduced by 1% if in return we could get a lot more pay equality in the United States.
Right.
So I know a lot of times there are trade-offs here. So when I'm talking about Nike, I'm talking like an economist, and I would be fine seeing more done. And the other thing is that early on, when Trump was arguing against China, a lot of my friends, who I will call elites, were acting like this whole thing of decoupling from China was absurd for economic reasons, etc. And what I kept saying is, listen to the people. They are furious. You can sit here and talk about how they're getting iPhones for $100 less because of China, but their response to that is, yeah, and I'm getting paid $9 an hour. And you have got to listen to that. And that's one of the reasons Trump won back in 2016.
Right.
And I think that we're starting to realize this. Now, on the cannabis front, those are great points. We're very mindful of that. We have the China Law blog, we have the Canna Law blog. The Canna Law blog is truly the blog in the cannabis space. And today's post addresses that issue somewhat, and tomorrow's post addresses it even more directly. And when we were arguing for legalization of cannabis, one of my favorite argument, especially with lawyers, I would say to friends of mine, what happens if my kid, my 16-year-old daughter at the time, who's cute, white girl, cute as a button, her father's a prominent lawyer in Seattle, her mother's a school psychologist, let's say she gets picked up for cannabis. Worst thing that's going to happen is she goes to court. I hire the best cannabis lawyer in town, criminal lawyer, who I know. He does it. My wife and I go in there. We make her dress well. My wife mouths all the psychology things. I'm up there as a lawyer. They give her 30 hours of community service. What happens if a black kid, same age, goes in there with his pants hanging down, dressed in a way that a judge finds offensive? That kid might get 30 days in juvie. And that sort of equality, or not equality, inequality, that sort of argument can be very effective with lawyers, no matter what their politics. They don't like to see the law being applied unequally. And so what has shocked me about our cannabis practice is how virtually nobody was bothered by our doing it. But we do realize that the drug war was started by Nixon, basically to go after blacks, to go after black people. It was the whole silent majority thing, which Trump, the idiot that he is trying to reprise. And black people have been disproportionately arrested for pot since the beginning of time, and even today, that is still the case. And legalization will help with that. It's not going to cure it. And a lot of terrible things that police have done to black people, like George Floyd, but not in the case of George Floyd, have involved stops for cannabis. And what has always infuriated me, and I believe this was the case with Michael Brown, and was the case with Trayvon Martin, people say, oh, they were found with pot in their system. It's like, what are you talking about? What 16? I mean, they make it seem like that makes the person a bad person. No, but that's not how white people think about other white people. If my 16-year-old, who's now more than 16, had been caught with pot, no one would have said, oh, she deserved to get in a car crash. They would say, oh, she's got to grow up. They wouldn't say she's a bad person. So, I mean, there definitely is a link there, and it's got to be decoupled. So we need to decouple that link. We need to decouple from China.
Right.
There we go.
Well, right. And I think that, economic opportunity being provided, is going to help with that as well. I mean, one of the, they're just in socioeconomic positions. Like, your sick daughter goes to the judge, and, all the things you described, there's already, like you're saying, that the preconception there, like I know where this girl comes from. Like, I know it's a well-to-do family. I understand where her trajectory is going to go. I understand, she's a kid, all the rest. Whereas whenever you look at it, for the same black kid, because of the movies or because of whatever it is, oh, I know where this goes.
I better teach him a lesson now.
Again?
Yeah, you're right. The judge with my kid says, I'm not going to interfere with this girl's life. But with the black kid, right, the judge goes, I need to teach this kid a lesson right now. He or she may even be well-meaning.
Yeah. Well, right. They trust your wife to handle what needs to be handled in that situation, whereas there's no trust on the side of the others. Oh, well, you know, his daddy is that, and, you know, it goes all the way back. And so, no, absolutely. And Paul,
I wouldn't want to point something out. So I don't know when I hear the argument that an African-American child gets sentenced differently. That to me is an issue with judge, the judge and their discretion. I was an employment discrimination paralegal for 4 years in college, and we sued the Selliger and Associates I worked for, a very famous civil rights firm in Chicago, and we sued all the telecoms because they, in the prison system, which is disproportionately African American, let's say in Illinois, you have collect call is the only way people can talk to their folk, and the collect call are exorbitant rates of $2.50 surcharge and $1.25 a minute, and that to me is absolutely systematic racism from the get-go, from not being able to talk to your attorney to not being able to talk to your family and being isolated from
prisons are private prisons that make money off this stuff.
No, they're all of them.
Right. I mean, the whole system, and I'm not speaking as a liberal or a conservative here. Our prison system, our criminal system, it's set up to profit people who do not deserve to profit from it. We have way more police, way more prisons, way more people in prison than comparable countries, and yet we have more crime. It isn't working. And this whole defunding the police thing, when I first heard it, when my kids were talking about it, I'm like, this doesn't make sense. The more I read about it, the more I buy into it.
No, please, no, don't say that.
I do. Because what it's saying is that the police their role should be far more limited. They do everything, and they're not good. They're good at basically only one thing, and that's crime.
I think this is
community service people. That should go to other agencies.
I agree with that, but the movement of defunding the police sounds to me more aggressive than that. However, I think that, Noad, if you wanted to say something on that, I just wanted to touch on, prison reform and all that is a huge issue. And I think now we're starting to tackle, it started with this, and it's going to move into other, the police brutality is morphed into general right discussion, and that's going to get into different areas. But these systematic racism and systematic indifference, it's happening in every community. It's happening all the time. Black communities can't work together. That's another challenge. They're having very difficult times working with each other. And that comes down to economic opportunities they cannot provide, and so they can't get a stable populace to support them and everything else. I mean, we have a broken system. However, when you look at it, who else has done what we did? Yeah, Minnesota, we brought in Somalians and gave them, 20 years exemptions to live here, okay? And, you're talking about before them the Russians and anyone that wants to come to this country and any religion and everyone. So, we're not doing so bad when you look at China, where we started this discussion having a homogeneous society, and, we are just continuing to take everyone in with different viewpoints. We're complicated. We're getting more complicated and less white where we started. But I think it's beautiful harmony. I'm not against this. I think that we're really making progress here. There.
I challenge you on that, because when I was in college, I studied in France, and I would get a lot of heat from the French because of race relations in the United States. This was a long time ago. And I would say, you are right. it's not good, but you don't understand. It is getting better every day. And that's what always made me feel better, because I believed that race relations were getting better every day in the United States. Then I went and lived in Spain for a year in 2017, and I came back to the US and I was shocked because they had gotten worse. And that is not a good feeling. I will defend the United States on race relations as long as the arc is upwards. It's gone back upwards, but it was trending down for the last 2 or 3 years, and that is not acceptable.
Well, but Dan,
big jump in the last month.
I say to my French counterparts that 15% of France, that 12 to 15% of France is Muslim, and prisons, 80% of prisoners are minority Muslims. So the French are having the same problem, right. And two, the race relations here, I would argue that we're on a human level, on a musical level, on a lot of levels. There is the youngsters, and that's what's paved the way for your two courageous children to go out and do what they want to do and fight for what they want to fight for. And for me, that's been started for a long time, and that's been implanted. So there has been change, and this is the culmination. Because when I was a kid, I was Jewish in Chicago, and I was fighting. Against religious persecution. I was having issues with, in Chicago, if you were gay as a boy at that time, you were going to get picked on. There was no way, there was no safe haven. Okay. So today we've made incredible progress. We haven't come far, and George Floyd was a terrible incident, and you can pin it to a lot of things. But to me, there is progress, and we have to acknowledge that, because when we don't acknowledge that, we don't acknowledge where we came from.
Yeah, although, yes, I mean, we should acknowledge the progress. And one of the reasons we should is because, which I do with my kids, people who think that we can't, it's an antidote for people who think we can't progress. But right. It's interesting because I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and there's one thing that's really sort of weirded me out, and that is when I grew up in a very integrated neighborhood, like probably 50-50. And in my mind, it was almost blissfully free of prejudice. But then I go back to my high school reunion, and there was a guy there who had been a good friend of mine. He's a black, he's African American. He had been a good friend of mine up to junior high. And I said, Steve, whatever happened? I mean, you moved away, right? He goes, no, I didn't move away. I moved like 3 blocks away. And we talked about it, and we realized that basically by junior high, whites really weren't friends with blacks. It was just not really that common. It wasn't like there was hatred. It just sort of ended. And then we talked about our different experience, and this guy goes off and gets a PhD. And I'm like, wow, I mean, I had no idea. And because I didn't know him since we were in 6th grade. I forget what the subject was, but it was a serious subject from a serious university. And I was hugely impressed. And he talked about, because when he was in school, and this is in, Kalamazoo, Michigan, which is Kalamazoo Central is where Barack Obama came and spoke, because it was sort of a model of integration, my high school. And yet he talked about how he didn't realize that he could go off and get a PhD, because in high school, he was always pushed not to take the honor.
Well, and I had a similar experience too.
Because he was black.
Yeah, for myself, I didn't realize I was in university actually. Like I grew up in a very rural town, nowhere near 50-50. And I didn't even really know that there was an after college. Like, college is kind of, I have a master's degree now, but college is kind of like an ethereal sort of thing, right? And then if it weren't for the fact that there was a university in my hometown, it probably never would have happened. And so I go, to the university, in my town, and then it was probably my sophomore year there. I got identified actually by the McNair Scholar Program, which was named after Steve McNair, or not Steve, the astronaut, the black astronaut. And John Matea pulled me, and he just asked me, what are your plans after university? Well, what's an after? I don't even know what that means necessarily, right? And so, it wasn't even until and I went to university kind of late too. I was probably early 20s, 22 or so, before I even realized that there was, opportunity, potential, advanced degrees, MAs, PhDs, and all that. And so, no, what you're saying, it's, it's true. It's not something that's in the purview. And, I kind of even harkens back to, going out in front of the judge, like you were saying, the difference between like the judges know that this kid is not going to university, because they know, that this kid doesn't even know what university is. And they know that his parents aren't going to pay for him to go to university. And they know that he went to a school and he didn't get good grades and he's not going to be able to get a scholarship in that university. So they know already, this is planned out statistically speaking and all the rest, that he's going to have no choice, but to enter into this stereotype that, that we put into him. And, a lot of that is, I think the real question there is if it were Dan Harris is a 16-year-old dollar, but you were just black, right? But the same credentials, psychologist, successful lawyer, all the rest. What role would that play? And then that would be a minority, right? Like that wouldn't happen very often. And then the next question would be, okay, let's say that becomes a norm, right? Like there's just as many, economically, successful, blacks as there are whites with the same, job positions and everything. At that point in time, is it still going to be, the same sort of situation? And that, to me is where we need to, kind of be looking and heading. And like Anna Paul was saying, part of getting there, because if you're not there, then, the conversation still has to be had, because you're still statistically not where you need to be. And to me, this is what Anna Paul was saying, in that, well, let's bring back the jobs, let's bring back the manufacturing, Apple, Nike, all these, advanced manufacturers, AMD, Pentium, they should be training, they should be putting factories here, they should be elevating the level of education, they should be elevating the economic opportunity. And then that actually puts us in a position where we can, not staticize or judge based on statistics and stereotypes. Like we can actually make it an even playing field.
Sadly, I think it's going to take another 100 years. And the thing is, this is where, again, the economist in me comes out. And it's a somewhat radical notion for an old white guy to be saying this. But I'm not sure whether I'm for or against reparations. But I love to talk about it. And the reason I love to talk about it is, and one of the things I often talk about is Americans love to say, hey, there's so little discrimination now, it doesn't really matter. Things are equal. And my response to that, this was before George Floyd, my response to that always was, look, you can believe that if you want. I don't believe it. But even if you do believe it, even if you believe that the distance that everyone's equal right now in terms of how far they have to run, what you have to realize is that Black Americans are starting 100 yards back of white Americans on the starting line because of economics, meaning you can't say, hey, we have this civil rights bill, everybody's equal, because that ignores history. It ignores the fact that Black Americans were pushed into the worst neighborhoods, not given mortgages. So right now,
still not given mortgages.
Still not given mortgages.
Or business loans.
Or business loans.
Sure.
Or have accounts at a bank. They use Walmart to pass money for a $4 fee. There's no credit.
Right. And so I like people talking about reparations, because what we did for Black people did not, yes, it's the Civil Rights Act, great, no doubt about it, absolutely necessary, but it doesn't do enough. I mean, you can't just turn them everybody into a Rockefeller by passing a law. I mean, we've got to do more, and I think people are finally starting to realize this.
I'm not sure though that, see, I think we're running out of time to get into such a meaty issue, but I'm not sure reparations, or I think it's a great discussion too, Dan. And I think that we have to get into practical solutions and move past this in our nation's history. As Jews, as minorities, see, I don't see myself as white. I start there. I see myself, now I understand being Black is physical, and Jews, you can't see it, and everything else, but I've come from my own level of dealing with discrimination, and in living in China for 14 years has its own thing. And me, I feel that where we're going, and that's where I hearken what I said 2 times, we're going in the right path. If we have these conversations proactively about what we can do to solve the stuff, we're going to win. We're going to be the best. We're going to continue to be great, because what China, and to end this conversation, in my opinion, what China doesn't understand is closing, polluting, manipulating, and taking over is not the trend of the future. America might be broken in the Native American regions, but at least we admit it. Right. And at least we're working to resolve it. And at least we're acknowledging we're wrong. And there's a fight for the right. And that fight for the right is the path you want to be on. You don't want to be closed.
And I'm going to end it with a cliche, which I wholeheartedly believe, and I know there are a lot of CEOs of very big American companies that wholeheartedly believe it also. And that is that America's strength is its diversity. And that truly is a strength. And one of the most convincing arguers of that point was the CEO, or the COO of Microsoft, who said that Microsoft can develop software for Ethiopia and Amharic, no problem, with people in-house, because they have so many Ethiopians. They can do it for Vietnam. They can do it for China. There's no other country that can do that. Silicon Valley is built on diversity. Our auto industry is built on diversity. That is what I call our not so secret sauce. And you talk about France. I lived in France, and you can never really become French, no matter how long you've been there. And contrary to what Trump says, most Americans still believe you can be a real American, no matter what your race, religion, ethnicity, or where you come from. And that has got to remain, and I think it will. So maybe that's a good hand on.
Very nicely put.
I believe this.
Nice. Dan, thank you so much for your time. We covered a lot of stuff tonight. I just want to give everyone just a quick opportunity to kind of sum up their thoughts. Noad, would you like to, anything you'd like to leave us with?
You talked about the government in China being replaced. Do we want it? Because not everywhere it's end up as a good thing.
Oh,
a lot of people.
I think we do. That was my argument against the U.S. getting involved. Even in Libya, I opposed that, because Americans acted like if Gaddafi leaves, all of a sudden Abraham Lincoln comes in. Well, no. But China has a lot of very international, sophisticated people who would love to see change there and are talking quietly about it. Now, who knows how many people there are there, but...
You think it'll stay the same country?
Pardon?
Will it stay China or will it break into...
I think it'll probably break, because I don't see how you can become a democracy and hang on to portions that don't want to be with you. But I don't think that would be that harmful, in the sense that if, let's say, Tibet breaks away peacefully, there can be good relations between Tibet and China after that. So I don't necessarily see that as a weakening of China. I see it actually as a potential strengthening.
Yeah, but even if you look at the Soviet Union, when it collapsed, it came with about 30 years, 20 years of chaos.
No. The control that they have is intense, and there will be a slow burning there. I'm not sure there'll be too much of an overthrow, but more so that there'll be a lot more control, that they monitor everyone in what they perceive as technology, Noad, which is traceability is all trackability. They're tracking everyone. They control it.
At some point, they won't be able to do that, and then they'll start recruiting from that big country. So they'll start, focusing more and more, in my opinion. So I don't know if it's.
They won't. They won't, Noad. That once you have complete control, 360 of people, and you know exactly where they are, and there's no currency. It's a digital currency, so there's no way to get away from it. And they are able to basically record and every action you have, because they're monitoring your mobile phone. They have a timestamp of everything that's going on. At that point, when they export that system to other countries,
that's a lot of info on a lot of people. Who's going to analyze that? Because
oh, my friend, that's artificial intelligence. That is the backbone of what they're doing. That's what they're exporting.
Dan,
not all China is Shanghai, so you have hundreds of millions that lives in little cities, far. And don't you think?
No, you don't. You don't have cities. That's what they've done, is they've pooled them along the southern region, and they've just basically took in all your immigrants, like Dan said earlier, of 1 billion folk. I would say more like 500-600 million, still very poor, and they've pulled them into cities, and so you don't have them strewn around. You have them more concentrated. But ultimately, I think that's the goal, is to be able to control, and that technology, which is supposed to be seen as revolutionary in artificial intelligence and synthesizing all that information, that is the thing. That's the fight.
Right. And
West versus the East.
At core, that is the fight. That's, really what I think the disagreement is between, like you talk about a war of ideologies between the U.S. and China. Like that is the war. The war,
right.
In America, we have, a society where we're not trying to control. We want people to be their own. We want people to express their ideas, have opinions. Whereas in China, they're squashing that, and they do want complete control. Dan, we've talked about a lot: race relations, business, China. Where's it going? Where's it headed? We have a lot more to talk about. I hope you come back on the show sometime so that we can discuss police states and and more cannabis law. And as this race situation develops, over the next couple months, we would love to hear your insight and opinions again. Before we go here, would you like to tell anyone about where they can find you, where they can read more about you, how they can get more of your ideas, any publications you put out, like how can people get to know Dan Harris and follow you?
Well, there's the China Law blog, and you can follow me on Twitter as well if you would like.
And your handle?
At Dan Harris. And I oftentimes get thanked for the the books I write and the speeches I give, but that's the other Dan Harris. That's the ABC newscaster who wrote 10%. But I have the right handle. It's Dan Harris.
So you get the real Dan Harris is on AnyStrike The Edge, and we thank him for coming. Adam, Paul, Noad, once again, thank both
Thanks,
of
Dan.
you
Thank you all.
for co-hosting. And everyone, make sure you subscribe, check it out, check out Dan, follow his Twitter, get involved in the conversation. That's really what we're trying to spark here, at AnyStrike The Edge. And we'll see everybody next time. Thank you.
Thank you.